Welcome to the Jedi Ranger. I'm JohnBerry555, and for the past 4 Wednesdays, I've uploaded my reviews of Rogue One, A New Hope, The Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. So today I thought I'd combine all those 4 reviews together before I move on to the prequel Star Wars films, so that way we can look at the combined story of the original trilogy. So we'll take a look at kind of each film individually, basically in the context of I'm doing this all post Star Wars and then I'll give my overall original trilogy era films thoughts. But yes, Rogue One was not original trilogy in terms of production, but it is in terms of story, so it fits through. Solo's going to be the oddball in all this. Probably won't get into a compilation video until I do all the films together, but we got some time before we get to that. So in the meantime, let's go do these in chronological order rather than production order, because we're going to be starting with Rogue One, because that's how I filmed it. So production order for me, chronological order for in-universe. So enough yapping for me. Well, you get more yapping for me, but enough pre-yapping for me. Let's get into the actual reviews. Back in December of 2016, I made my first ever Star Wars review. That was for the film Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. Season 2 of Star Wars Andor has aired its final episodes. Andor is done for. I'm sad, but it does give me the opportunity to re-watch Rogue One with a new context in mind. This is the Jedi Ranger. I'm JohnBerry555, and this is my new improved review of Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. If you would like, you can go watch my original review, but I think this one's going to be a little more polished. And this one's going to be in the context of Star Wars Andor Season 2. And the first thing I would like to express is how Andor Season 2 is designed to lead into Rogue One. There's a line from, I believe, Moff Tarkin to Director Krennic talking about security leaks. We only see one leak in Rogue One, and that being Jyn Erso giving a message to Bodhi to give to Saw that eventually roundabout way finds its way to the rebellion. But in Andor, we see additional leaks. Lonnie giving the information about the Death Star to Lucen, who then gives it to Claire, who then gives it to Andor, who then together gives it to the Rebel Alliance. Information is leaking, and that's part of what Tarkin is using to justify taking control of the Death Star. It's also why Vader, but with a dad joke, mind you, do not choke on your aspirations, basically tells Director Krennic to get his act together and maybe you won't be killed. And that includes, sealing all those security leaks. But of course, those leaks are out. The Death Star is out, and the Rebel Alliance finds out about it. There's many individual moments here and there. One thing I would like to mention is there's a scene where Cassian tells Jyn that he is not the one she has to convince. He's referring to the Rebel Alliance Council, and as we see later in Rogue One that, she does not do a good job by convincing them. Yeah, Mon Mothma and Bail Organa and Admiral Raddus are ready to take the fight to the Empire. They know it's coming, but the rest of the council is not ready yet and is unwilling to take action. And that's what leads to Jyn, Baze, Chirrut, Cassian, Melshi, and many other rebels deciding to take action. And then Mon Mothma, Bail Organa, and Admiral Raddus also decide to take action against the council. The Rebel Alliance rebels against itself to defeat the Death Star. That is essentially what happens. But all that advice Cassian gives to Jyn is first-hand experience of his own issues getting the Rebel Alliance Council to take his own intel seriously. Intel about the Death Star, mind you. But what I really want to show though is that they establish why Cassian knows the Rebel Alliance Council is not going to act because the proof is not strong enough. So I have a feeling even if Jyn had grabbed the message from her father that Saul had, I still think a few of the members of the Rebel Alliance would be like, nope, not going to do anything about it. I still think there's a good chance that is to happen. But Rogue One is a story about rebels, and as I mentioned, rebels rebel, and they rebel against themselves in order to fight the Empire. But there's another thing before we get to scales that I would like to talk about. When Jin and Cassian first meet Chirrut, that very much, rewatching that scene, it called back to when Cassian met the Force Healer on Yavin in Season 2 of Andor. Both times he's unsettled. Cassian, with that Force Healer, is basically confronted with his destiny. A destiny that he's not really in control of. He's also referred to as a messenger, I believe, by the Force Healer. And that's what him and Jin do at the very end. They send a message hoping somebody would listen. But he's unsettled by all that in Andor. He's also unsettled by Chirrut. He knows Chirrut is a member of the Guardians' Wills, but he also, I think, recognizes that Chirrut seems to have some connection to the Force, something that I think unnerves Cassian. And Chirrut, sensing Jin's necklace, even though she has it covered, and sensing maybe something about her destiny, unnerves Cassian. I really love that character consistency between Cassian, though at the end of the story, he does embrace his destiny. He does not run from his destiny. But one thing with all that is that Cassian very much, it's not because he's running from his destiny or willing to embrace it, it's because he knows that's the right thing to do. There's also a scene where Cassian tells Jin that rebellions are built on hope. That scene, of course, was in Rogue One, and somebody apparently said to Tony Gilroy that it sounded like that Cassian was repeating it rather than really believing it. And that's why he included the bellhop at the hotel on Gorman to say that to Cassian right before the Gorman massacre, that rebellions are built on hope. And I think it's fitting that Cassian learns to trust in hope, learns to essentially trust in the Force. Just like how in Rogue One, Chirrut, he trusts in the Force till the end, and then Baze, seeing Chirrut trust in the Force and accomplish an impossible task, comes to believe in the Force once again and trust in it, and is able to take out all the Death Troopers on the beach. Yes, he sacrificed himself in the process, but everyone in the Rogue One, that team, knew it was going to be a sacrificial mission. But they hoped that their sacrifice, their actions, were going to win the day. And in a sense, you can trace that all the way to a young bellhop on Gorman who inspired Cassian in the moment that he needed its inspiration. But we can also trace that back all the way to Nemec and his manifesto, who I think truly inspired Cassian to dedicate his life to the rebellion, dedicate his life to ending tyranny and bringing freedoms back to the galaxy. I think that very much is what Cassian's doing. Yes, the Force has set him on a destiny, but he's also doing the right thing because it is the right thing. Yes, he's not trying to subvert the will of the Force, but he's not necessarily embracing it either. And I think that's very much fitting in how we see Cassian in Rogue One. He's doing the right thing to defeat the Empire because it is the right thing, not because of anything regarding destiny, regarding the Force. I also like to think that Luke Skywalker, even if the Force never brought R2-D2 and C-3PO to him, never had him meet Obi-Wan Kenobi and learn his potential as a Jedi, I still like to think Luke would have eventually found his way to the rebellion. But that's more of a side tangent there, as the heart of Rogue One is a story about people, regular people, doing what they can to fight tyranny. And that's also the story of Star Wars Andor. And when you look at them together and then also bring in Star Wars A New Hope, you're seeing individual pieces achieving a collective goal, but not like cogs in the machine like the Empire where everyone's replaceable. Every member of the Rebel Alliance means something. Yes, maybe the role, their job can be replaced, but they personally cannot be replaced. Their sacrifices mean something. They accomplish things with their sacrifice. Every member of the Rogue One team accomplished something to defeat the Empire. Be it distracting the Empire just long enough, taking out a single stormtrooper, what gives? They all did their part. They weren't cogs. They were not links in a chain, though I do kind of like that metaphor. I prefer seeing them as runners in a relay race. They each have a baton, and they do something to pass that baton to the next person. And that baton passing, well, you can talk about when that began. You could look at Revenge of the Sith and that first baton being the Force warning Yoda about the oncoming of Order 66, or Obi-Wan getting lucky with his Force thanks to the Force. Or, if just in the context of Andor, Rogue One, and A New Hope, just look at 2 children being saved, and 3 adults doing the saving, plus one of them being saved. Marva and Clem saving Cassian on Kenari, and Lucen saving Kayla. I can never get her name right, I'm sorry. Or her saving Lucen at the same time. But that is, in terms of the story being told by Andor, Rogue One, and A New Hope, because they all lead into each other, so those are where the batons begin. But each character has their own baton. Nemec has his baton with his manifesto, which just spreads to the point where even diehard Imperials who are fully ingrained in the Empire, fully believe in it, are still being impacted, both maybe in a subtle way, but perhaps in a way like realizing his time, major progress, his time as a cog in the machine is done, and he has only one action left. Well, he has 2 choices, but he chooses the only action that he gets to dictate. That's his choice, his freedom. It's his own subconscious making that choice for him, the choice that he can make. Yes, he could have made a different choice, but it would have been his choice. And he doesn't even realize that Nemec's manifesto got to him. That's what I'm saying there. But Nemec's manifesto is one of those batons. How many members of the Rebel Alliance, how many members of Rogue One's team heard Nemec's manifesto? And the reason why they volunteered was because of Nemec just saying, try to do something, hope you're going to succeed. How many members of the Rogue One's team are there because of Nemec? We don't know. Cassian, definitely, but we just don't know. And that's what's so great about how all 3 of those stories connect up together. They're all leading into each other and building off of each other. And while the themes do change, they're not inconsistent. They're staying put. And it's all about resisting tyranny, about fighting against fascism, authoritarianism, and tyranny. That's the story of Star Wars. And that's the dedicated story of Star Wars Andor and Rogue One and A New Hope. They all just go about it in different ways. And then, of course, there's the whole thing about Scarif, which is just a great scene as a whole. Really just great to see the first proper battle in Star Wars. Yes, we saw a little bit of Endor and of Yavin and of Hoth, but not like what we get to see on Scarif. And the reason why is, in Empire Strikes Back, Hoth is just a set dressing, a delaying action. In Universe, it was definitely a delaying action, but what impact does the battle have on the story, the character development for Luke, for Leia, for Han? Not that much. How much, story-wise, do the Battle of Endor have on for Luke? Not too much. Yes, his friends are getting slaughtered by the Empire, but it's window dressing, literally, in Luke's case. And for Leia, she's just continuing to fight. It doesn't really feel like those are the stakes, but they're not moving the individual character stories going on. But we do get that with Scarif. Each individual rebel gets their own moment, especially Baze and Chirrut. They get some great moments on the beach, but Baze especially because he regains his trust in the Force because of Chirrut's actions in the battle. We get them all making choices to advance the field. And each fighter pilot that the rebels bring, they all make those choices. And all of those choices, especially for our main characters, tells us something about them. Choices they're making in the battle that are impacting their characters. The other battles, they're great. They have their great moments. Luke's turning the targeting computer off in A New Hope. Perfect character development. Leia basically, using her wound to basically get the drop on 2 stormtroopers in the Battle of Endor. Perfect as well. Tells us a bunch we need to know about who she is as a character. And definitely helps Han realize that he likes her. But in terms of saying something greater, I don't feel like they do as much, nor do so as realistically. And that's what Rogue One is. It's the real battle of the rebellion. You have those stakes. We don't get, except for really seeing one Ewok mourning the death of another Ewok, we don't feel the stakes in the battle, the personal loss in the battle. But we do for Scarif. We really get that with Baze and Chirrut, but all the characters, like many of the characters, we get a moment focusing on them after they pass. We get to see Melchi. Yeah, man, he went so far. And I teared up watching it because I knew what was going to happen to all these characters. But characters like Meshi, who we hadn't seen before until Andor, we get to see his backstory like, oh, wouldn't it be great if he could continue fighting for the rebels, continue living, thriving, and so many more. But we knew how the story is going to end. It's tragic. And that's the thing is, there's different kinds of suspense. But what Rogue One does with its suspense, because we knew everyone before, and especially in the rewatch, that no one's really coming out alive among our main characters. But they achieve suspense in the emotions, getting us to feel something, feel connected to the main characters. And that's where Rogue One thrives, because you tear up because you care about these characters. They don't feel like larger-than-life heroes. They feel like real heroes who gave the ultimate sacrifice to save everyone else they cared about, and in the hopes that things will be better. And because of Star Wars being an established property, we know things do get better. But that still doesn't mean we don't care about these people and feel sad when they pass in the universe. There's more I can talk about. I'm sure I talked 45 plus minutes with my original Rogue One review, but with this review, I think I'm going to cut it shorter because I've said the most important things. And if you want to talk about other aspects of the movie, we can. And we can do so in the comment section down below. So I would love to hear your thoughts on what I had to say and about Rogue One as well, and how it connects into the rest of Star Wars, especially Star Wars Andor. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. Welcome to the Jedi Ranger. I'm JohnBerry555, and I'm finally reviewing Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. You think I would have talked about the film by now, and actually, technically, I have. Because I did a one change to each Star Wars film and a 3 reasons why each Star Wars film is not the worst YouTube short series. So I did talk about this film, but I've never done a proper review of A New Hope. And considering just last week I did a re-review of Rogue One following the completion of Star Wars Andor, I figure it's time to get into the rest of the Star Wars films. And we might as well begin with the film that began it all in 1977. Star Wars, and that's what it's called. It was literally just called Star Wars back then. Though George Lucas has renamed it to Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. And also a special edition. Unfortunately, I have yet to really see the original theatrical cut, but I do have a version that's extremely close on VHS. Unfortunately, I did not watch that version. I just watched the version that was on Disney+. So, to begin with, I want to address one thing. The scene with Han talking with Jabba is not needed. That scene really is not needed. Everything that was in the Greedo scene was included there. So we don't need both scenes, one or the other. And I think the Greedo scene is better because Han shot first. No matter how the editing may make it look, Han shot first. Additionally, I do think the scene where Red Leader says that he knew Luke's father should have been kept in. That should not have been removed after the theatrical release. Mainly because I think it's fine. It's fine that people know who Anakin Skywalker was, that he was a Jedi. It's just that they are not supposed to know that he became Darth Vader. That's the thing that people don't know. So it's fine if people know who Luke's father actually is, as in Anakin Skywalker. And also, the scene with Biggs would have been nice if, Luke somehow mentioned Biggs earlier. The deleted scene with him is not necessary, but would have been nice to kind of set that up maybe a little bit better. But those are nitpicks, because really, this is a great film. And it started there, had to have been great. But as we know, George Lucas was not necessarily optimistic about its reception, but turns out we loved it. And it's still a really solid film, even despite the special edition and the changes that George Lucas have made to it. Despite that, it's still a very solid film. I will say, if you only exposure to Star Wars so far had been Andor and Rogue One, you'd be like, who are these characters? What do they have to do with the characters we saw before? Yeah, we saw Princess Leia at the end of Rogue One, but who's this Luke guy? Who's this Ben Kenobi guy? Who's this Darth? Oh wait, Darth Vader's that guy in that hallway scene. Okay, you would not have context for a lot of these characters, but I got to say one thing. Because of Rogue One, Leia is flat off lying in front of Darth Vader, who, unbeknownst to either one of them, they're related. Neither one of them know that at this time. But seriously, she just basically ran away from Scarif with the plans, and she said she has the gall. And I have to say, it's quite brave, confident of her, the gall, to basically flat out lie in front of Darth Vader, the Emperor's enforcer, and say, yeah, I don't know what you're talking about, I'm just on a diplomatic mission. And he literally witnessed what's going on. It makes that scene just all the more badass, for lack of a better term, really. Additionally, Rogue One and Star Wars Andor put the event that we see in A New Hope into even more context. We obviously knew that to a certain extent. A lot of the base stuff we needed to know was covered in the crawl. But an important context is Leia's decision to return to Yavin knowing the Empire is tracking them despite Han's dismissiveness. She knows how the rebellion basically won't act unless forced to, and so she forces them to actually confront the Death Star. And also, too, it's the wise choice to not put any additional systems at risk. Very smart on her part. I also have to say, when she tells Tarkin that as the Empire continues to tighten its grip, that most systems will slip through the cracks, that very much reminds me of a lot of the sentiment echoed in Star Wars Andor with Namek, with Lucid, the idea of as the Empire tightens its grip, people will start to feel the pressure. It won't be like a frog in a pot that's slowly boiling. It'll be like a frog that's in a pot slowly boiling and jumping out when it realizes it's getting too hot. Very, very clever there, and I really did like how basically the sequels, but not the sequels, if you know what I mean, basically put a lot of this stuff into additional context. But of course, the story of Star Wars: A New Hope is not just the political story that is given additional context in Rogue One and Andor. It's also very much a character story, mainly for Luke and Han. Leia does not get too much character development in this film, but Han and Luke, yeah. Han, well, he kind of still is a bit selfish at the end, but he does come around. He does realize that, yeah, he probably should help the rebellion out to defeat the Empire. Basically, he starts going for the money, and then he ends up making the right choice anyhow, without considering the reward or anything like that. I also like to think Chewbacca told him, hey, this would be the right thing to do. You should do the right thing. And Han deep down knows it's the right thing and listens to Chewbacca. But that's just my little fan theory there. But Luke, his story, his character development is more on display. He wants, to seek adventure and all that, and he does get his adventure. Yes, he loses his mentor, but he meets new friends along the way, and basically comes out a hero. He goes from basically a know-nothing. He basically goes from a nobody farmer to hero of the rebellion. And yes, in Star Wars, he's from the son of Anakin Skywalker, the chosen one, yada yada. But that was not George Lucas's final intention when he was making the film. That's something that came out later on as he further developed his story and made the other movies. And really, Luke was just a farm boy who was seeking adventure just like his father, and had a chance to find adventure, and not just find adventure, but go on a journey to help others. There's a scene where Leia asks Han if anything matters to him besides money, if he actually cares for anyone besides himself, and Luke truly says, I care, showing that he, one, a contrast between him and Han at that stage in their character development, but also showing that Luke, I would say, him being a hero, he never sought out to be a hero. But he was a hero because that was the right thing to do, because he cared about others. At least that's how I interpret that scene. But there is one more thing I want to discuss before I end my review. That being the final award ceremony. So when George Lucas was making A New Hope, he had no idea that he would, in 3 years, be releasing The Empire Strikes Back. So this ending of A New Hope, the ending of Star Wars, was made to be a capstone. The heroes of the Battle Yavin are honored. Now, I will have to say, why didn't Wedge get a medal? Why didn't the Y-Wing pilot too? There's 2 different ones in Legends and Canon. They have different versions, but why didn't he in Legends and she in Canon get a medal? Why didn't Chewbacca get a medal? Well, later Star Wars stories have answered some of those questions. Chewbacca got a medal in a private ceremony, and it's revealed that Wookiees don't put stock into physical medals, which I really liked how they decided to justify Chewbacca not getting a medal by saying it's his culture, and it shows that the rebels value his culture and respect his cultural beliefs and practices. I really love that in retrospect, but it would be nice if maybe in the film. But here's a good headcanon for like why we didn't see Wedge and some of the others. Easy. Han and Luke and Chewie, they were at the back of the line, and they were waiting for their moment to enter. Because they were the final ones. That's my theory, at least. Because the idea of award ceremony, probably more than one rebel who was honored, but they got the ending honor. But that's just a little headcanon theory thing going on, though. But really, the point of that scene is showing that the rebels are triumphant, that the Empire is defeated. Yes, the Empire strikes back later on, but we didn't know that when this movie came out. We did not. And therefore, because there was no firm intention to make a second movie, George Lucas had to have it end on a satisfying final victory note, so that way we, the audience, would be satisfied. And that is what he accomplished. And to end out my review, I just have to say, Star Wars A New Hope, it's not the first Star Wars film I saw, but it is the quintessential Star Wars film. It has the messages of trusting in the Force. It has the message of being a good person makes you a hero. It has the message that evil can and will be defeated, but will commit atrocities until it is defeated, and you have to stand up against it. There's more we can talk about, but that's what the comment section is there for. So let's keep the discussion going. Welcome to the Jedi Ranger. I'm JohnBerry555, and I'm reviewing Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. So while I have talked about The Empire Strikes Back before in some YouTube shorts and in comments when talking about other Star Wars projects, I've never really talked about it truly in its own right in a full-length review. And that's true actually for most of the Star Wars films, so I am correcting that. Last week, I reviewed The New Hope, and before that, Rogue One. This week is going to be Empire Strikes Back, and next week is going to be Return of the Jedi, so stay tuned. But let's really dive into the film and discuss it. So, probably the most important thing to get out of the way first is that the original trilogy was not created with a cohesive narrative. Did George Lucas have things in mind? Yes. But he did not sit down, write out 3 movies, and then produce one every 3 years. No, that's more of the prequel trilogy. But still, despite that not being planned, despite what a lot of Star Wars fans want to think, the ideas in this film do follow logically from the previous film. The Death Star is defeated, but the war is not over. The Empire is going to seek its revenge. Now, from expanded material, we know it's been 3 years, but in the context of the film, it could be anywhere from a month later to, well, maybe not a decade later, but a couple years later. And we've set it in the universe, canon and Legends, I believe, are being about 3 years in universe time. And we get to see, the Rebellion growing. There's not really growing, but think of this. In A New Hope, the only rebel ships we see are some fighters. At the end, in this movie, in Empire Strikes Back, on Hoth we get to see some transports, and then we get to see, at the end of the film, the biggest rebel ship we have ever seen at this point. Now, yes, timeline-wise, bigger ships have been seen before, but in terms of what was shown on screen first, we've seen the biggest ship now, which we've now known to be the Nebulon B frigate. So there's that sense of scale there. We've also seen now the second biggest Imperial ship, too, with the Executor or Executor. I always like saying Execute. Some people like Executor. Regardless, that's a huge debate in the fandom that just like, is it Tantive or Tantive V? But that sense of scales with ships is actually something that Star Wars does really nicely. Introduce one ship, then introduce an even bigger ship, and then introduce an even bigger ship. And we do kind of get that. No, we saw how big the Death Star was because we saw how big the Star Destroyer was in relationship to the Tantive 4. And here, well, we see how big the Executor is because we see a Star Destroyer, which we have context from its size from the previous film. So, and the reason why I'm bringing all this stuff up is to show how through visual language alone and background story details that are not maybe directly impacting the main plot, we are still getting a sense of time, of scale, of the different background factions, which all help create a real feeling world. But let's really take a look at the main plots. We have Luke Skywalker's story where he's basically training to be a Jedi, then confronting Vader and learning a horrible truth. And then we have Han and Leia's story, which is the love story of the film. Now, is it the best love story ever told in Star Wars? Probably not. Better than Anakin and Padme? Definitely. Maybe because it's not as toxic. It has its issues, mind you. There's a reason why they're separated in the sequel trilogy. But it's mostly because Han's a bit of a free spirit and, probably doesn't want to admit the better side of himself. So, he's still with the Rebel Alliance after 3 years. He hasn't gone back to pay off his debt to Jabba, and actually that does catch up to him in this film. But that was also they did in outside the universe in case Han Solo's actor Harrison Ford will not return for another film. But that is more of a side point to what the story being between the two. And that's basically Leia coming to realize that she does have feelings for Han, and Han learning to be maybe a bit more vulnerable with his own feelings and maybe be a bit more honest. Yes, when Leia tells him, "I love you," he says, "I know," and that's very much a Han Solo way of doing it. It fits his character perfectly, but it's also been him being more vulnerable. All throughout this film, basically he's hinting that Leia finds him attractive, but he doesn't find her attractive. But the truth is, he always did. And he just couldn't admit it until that end, when she also admits it because she couldn't admit it to herself. And that's the main storyline going there. Could it be better told? I think so. And I think the comics and books do help explain and flesh it out a bit better. And Star Wars does definitely have better romances. Star Wars Jedi Survivor is one good example of that. But the point I did want to emphasize there is how in that story, it, like I said, it could be better. I think very much 80s in the storytelling, so it doesn't really give, a few sweet gestures here and there, that's all you need. Not quite proper build-up, but like I said, it's more cringy in retrospect, but still I think way better handled than the toxic mess as Anakin and Padme's, mostly because of Anakin. But going back to Luke Skywalker, his story mainly involves around him being a Jedi. He crashes on Dagobah and meets Yoda, not realizing Yoda is being impatient, that gets Yoda concerned, yada yada. And Ben Kenobi's Force Ghost talks Yoda into, yes, giving Luke a chance, and Yoda trains Luke, and then Luke gets a vision of the future and goes off and ends up confronting Darth Vader. And is he ready for it? Not really. Luke loses. He survives, but he loses. But he only survives because Vader was never intending to kill Luke, only capture him and turn him to the dark side. And when capturing fails, Vader reveals the horrible truth that he is Luke's father. And what I really like about that scene is Luke denies it, and Vader tells Luke to search his feelings, it would be true. That's very much echoing what Palpatine tells Vader when Palpatine says that the offspring of Anakin Skywalker is alive. Now, Vader, we know from the comics, already knew this, But the point I want to emphasize there is that little bit of a parallel there, that this familial relationship is being revealed via the Force, essentially, and the individual trusting the Force and sensing the truth. Now, we know from expanded material that Palpatine knows Vader and Anakin are one and the same. Vader knows that, obviously, and Luke learns it in this film. But the way it's presented in this film implies that Palpatine, the Emperor, Darth Sidious, doesn't know Anakin and Darth Vader are one and the same. Obviously not, but that's the way it was presented. I think it would have been an interesting story opportunity to actually have gone down that route. But it still, while they didn't do that, the way they did do it works very much because Palpatine doesn't want Vader to associate with Luke Skywalker, not Luke Skywalker, kind of, with Anakin Skywalker at all due to the threat of him remembering who he used to be. Still wasn't the best person, but definitely a much better person, let's put it that way. But with all that being said, overall, it's a great film. There's a reason why The Empire Strikes Back is ranked as the number 1 or number 2 Star Wars film by most fans, myself included, is because it has a solid story. It divides our heroes up in a way that contributes to their own character developments and helps us learn more about their characters. And it just has some great background stuff as well. The Tauntaun stop motion, well, yes, probably a bit dated in terms of technical feats. At the time, I'm sure it looks stunning, and even now, it still looks pretty good. Though I gotta admit, when I'm watching on my DVD copy or on my VHS, I notice it being stop motion a lot less, but watching on Disney Plus is much more apparent. But that I attribute to just more of how with modern technology they can clean up a lot of stuff, so things that were once hidden due to film grain that are becoming a little more noticeable to modern audiences, especially if you're aware of the specific filming techniques that were used in order to create the film. Another great thing from a filmmaking's perspective is the crawl. Now, all Star Wars saga films have used the crawl, but it's a great way of getting some exposition and setting up the story without interrupting the narrative, because it begins at the beginning, it's exciting, it makes it feel grand, and it sets things up. And what little exposition they needed to do in Empire Strikes Back, it all feels organic. You have a Force vision, you have a character revealing a deep dark secret, you have a military briefing. Those are all natural in the world and thus don't feel out of place. A New Hope had to do a little more traditional expositions, but that was partially because not only were we new to the world then, but so was Luke Skywalker. He was taking his step into that greater world and he needed to learn about it. And he got that from his mentor giving him advice. And that is done in a way that fits into the narrative, fits into the story, and not interrupts the flow. Interrupting the flow would be if we opened up the film with a rebel describing the events that happened to another rebel, or a recap. I'm not a big fan of the recaps that are done on the Disney Plus TV shows. I feel like that hurts the story. The announcements that they did at the beginning of the Clone Wars episodes were a great way of doing it because it fit in, it helped. It didn't seem as out of place, if you will. But that's another factor, another story for another video. But what I really want to get in is that I do think of the original trilogy, I think of most Star Wars films, I think The Empire Strikes Back is the most technically soundly made film. The pieces come together well. It just fits itself and is very well made. Yes, other films are exceptionally well made as well, but I do think The Empire Strikes Back is the best made of all the Star Wars films. And there's more I can discuss. I can talk more about small character moments, about Lando, who I haven't even talked about, and his little arc there, his own little way of trying to protect his people, trying to be responsible, if you believe it. And in the end, he decides, he gets to a point where there's only one thing to protect the people. Speak the truth, tell them to flee before the Empire takes full control. And man, does that remind me very much of Mon Mothma, and she got to a point where she had to speak the truth and full on rebel against the Empire in order to protect the people of the galaxy. And that is kind of fitting there, and that is my little connection to Star Wars and with this film. It's a small connection, mind you, but it's a neat, thematic, and I think fairly important connection that helps shows our characters and shows that Lando is more responsible than Han. Han stays because he likes adventure and he's deep down a good person at heart. Lando does the right thing because he exhausts all other opportunities to keep his people, to keep the people of Cloud City safe from the Empire. And that is where I want to end this review. There's more I can discuss. I can discuss how Leia kisses her brother, but they didn't know that at the time. And that ending shot is just gorgeous. I'm overlooking that. I think it's supposed to be it's debated, is there like a star forming in the galaxy, another galaxy? There's a bit of debate there, but that interstellar formation and then the panning out and we get to see basically a map painting them. It's just gorgeous, and yes, it makes our heroes small as we pan out, but we see that they're part of this greater rebellion, which we've seen before. But here, like I mentioned at the beginning with the scale of the ships and how we've finally seen the biggest rebel ship we've seen so far, by making our heroes feel small in this big rebel ship, it shows the rebels are growing in their strength in their community and fighting the Empire. And that's that nice parallel there to what I mentioned earlier and everything that we saw in Andor, though Andor was made after all this. And because of that, this is retrospective things that we can apply that was not initially intended when the show was made. That's a long roundabout way to say Star Wars is good, The Empire Strikes Back is good. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Welcome to the Jedi Ranger. I'm JohnBerry555, and today I'm going to be reviewing Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. So if you haven't seen it, I have been rewatching and re-reviewing all the Star Wars films. I started with Rogue One after completing Star Wars Andor, and I continued with the original trilogy from there. And now we are at Return of the Jedi. So this Star Wars film is actually quite special to me. This is actually the first Star Wars film I ever got to see. So you can imagine there's some stuff that was spoiled for me by the time I actually watched the rest of the Star Wars films that were out at the time. And also, something like, oh, okay, whatever, because I like the context, like, why was it, a big deal that Vader was Luke's father besides the fact that they were on opposing sides of a galactic conflict? A lot of the stuff like that, I just didn't have the context for. But you know what? I got hooked on Star Wars and I've been a fan ever since. But let's really take a look at the film in different parts. First, let's address probably the biggest elephant in the room. And what's that, you may ask? That's going to be the special edition changes. So there's really, I would say, 1, 2, 3, 4 changes, 2 in the Jabba's Palace and 2 at the end that I want to discuss. In Jabba's Palace, they actually, as I understand it, refilmed some of the scenes specifically for the character Ola, for dancing and all that, and visiting Jabba going down to the Rancor pit. As I understand, they refilmed some of those scenes to expand it in. That stuff is perfect, you can hardly tell. But it's the musical stuff going on that changes. They, I believe, changed the song and introducing CGI characters that have not held up very well, at least on my screen. That's Slice Noodles, who I never liked as a character. Even her appearance in the Clone Wars, I did not like. Her design is alien in a way that does not seem like it. It's not a good alien design in my opinion. And I just don't like it. The CGI on her holds up better. It's that other kind of almost cockroach-like creature that his CGI does not hold up well at all. And it does kind of take you out of the moment, both those things. The music itself is actually not too bad. It's just the CGI they use doing that sequence is not great. And then the ending of the film, they changed Yub Yub to the Victory Celebration. And I really do like that change. Yub Yub was fine, but Victory Celebration seems bigger in scale and puts the rebellion into a wider context. By showing other planets besides Endor celebrating the defeat of the Emperor, it tells us, the audience, that the rebellion was not isolated. They were a big galaxy-wide movement. It has more impact, I think, on the story, and more of a sense of finality to the rebels' victory. Yes, we know both in canon legends the war did continue and all that, but that's more of a side point. The point is that at this point, it's showing that the Empire's time was over. On Palpatine's homeworld of Naboo, people were celebrating. Gungan clearly says Misa free, which is, for the Gungans, they've been kind of struggling for a long time for, their freedoms and all that. Things had started to improve, but things went south once the Empire took control. You had, Tatooine, which probably not as oppressed as some other worlds, definitely was feeling the boot of the Imperial Stormtrooper, as we saw in A New Hope. So we got celebrations there. We get to see Coruscant, and of course this was after the prequels when that change, I believe, was made. But that you got people celebrating on the capital of the Empire, including, if you pay attention, there's a Stormtrooper that's being carried by the crowd and likely to be thrown off a ledge. In fact, if I remember correctly, in Star Wars Return of the Jedi, from a certain point of view, Dexter Jester's story, I believe, actually addresses that and how he tried to save the Stormtrooper because, very much more of, hey, we defeat them, we don't need to punch them any farther kind of mentality. I don't know if he actually succeeds in that. But the point I want to get there is not only like on Coruscant, where it's likely more than just a celebration, but a popular uprising, showing that the Empire is defeated. Not only was the super weapon and the Emperor killed, but people were rising up. Really great way of book ending and showing that the fight against the tyranny, or authoritarianism, and fascism of the Empire was defeated, and that they were done for. There was no way they could recover. And going back to the song itself, the song itself is more, I would say, almost melancholy. It's still a celebration, but you can definitely tell, like, we defeated the Empire, but no, we had costs, we had sacrifices. There's more of a melancholy to it. Well, yep, it was great and all, or even compared to how A New Hope ended, the celebration seemed more triumphant, not that sense of melancholy, because yes, Vader was redeemed, but he had no chance to act on his redemption besides saving Luke. We have several other things as well, people who were lost and all that. And so those are just things that I feel like Victory Celebration emotionally conveys better than Yup had ever done. Of course, that is not all. And thanks to Star Wars Rebels, a very popular fan series came about that Captain Rex was the old rebel on Endor. While Forces of Destiny did kind of go that route, my headcanon is that the character from Legends, Nick Sant, who is basically a parody of St. Nicholas in terms of naming, and Rex are two separate characters who joke that they look vaguely similar to each other, and that they were both for Endor, but they were having different missions. That Rex's mission was more after the fact, bringing reinforcements down to help mop up the remaining Imperial forces on the planet. That's my headcanon there, but that's actually a great thing about Star Wars in general, is we do name a lot of background characters, but sometimes we don't, and sometimes we do in such a way that we can create fun headcanons, like how we got fake Wedge in The New Hope because of some interesting behind-the-scenes casting things, which I think was phenomenal, and I wish they would do that same thing with Nick Sant and with Captain Rex, because I just love that kind of funness there in the storytelling. But we really should be talking about the actual film. I've spent over 7 minutes now talking about changes and all that kind of stuff, and not the actual story of the film. And so I really want you to focus on Luke Skywalker. His story here is about him becoming a Jedi. The film is called Return of the Jedi, after all. And the first thing I want you to focus on in that is Luke, throughout most of the film, is wearing an all-black tunic. And for me, that is symbolizing the darkness that's inside of Luke, but also the darkness that is surrounding him, that is the threat, the conflict that he needs to overcome, the obstacle, in order to actually become a Jedi. And then we have Yoda's line to Luke that in order to become a Jedi, he must confront Vader, confront his father. Luke did need to convince Yoda to confirm that Vader is Luke's father. But I do want you to take a note and point out that the film uses the word confront. Not fight, not defeat, confront. Which I think is kind of telling. I think in both Obi-Wan and in Yoda's mind, that was confront as in fight a duel with Vader and defeat him. But the Force, the true confrontation for Luke to become a Jedi is to confront Vader and resist the pull of the dark side while also drawing Vader back to the light, drawing Anakin Skywalker back. That's Luke confronting Vader, confronting the dark side, and he overcame it. He did not succumb to it, did not let it control him. Now, and then to symbolize that visually to us, the audience, Luke Skywalker, after that duel, his tunic is partially pulled back, revealing the white interior. The light is now peeking through. And yes, in both Legends and in canon, Luke still struggled with the dark side, and the dark side was not fully defeated after confronting Vader and the Emperor. However, in my judgment, that's a minor thing, because especially when George Lucas was making Return of the Jedi, the story was about Luke confronting the dark side and resisting it, not about him defeating the dark side once and for all. Yes, the dark side will always be defeated. That is the ultimate message of Star Wars. The sequels do reiterate that, and also so do many stories in Legends. But for this story itself, Anakin, he doesn't need to be the chosen one. He chooses to save his son. That's why, and that's what redeems him. He chooses the path of love and compassion rather than hate and fear in that moment. He chooses to save someone. That's the Jedi thing. And while, yes, attachments are brought up vaguely in the original trilogy when talking about the Jedi, not like they were in the prequel trilogy. And that's partially because the story being told is a different story. The sequel is focused on the fall. Here it's focusing on someone becoming a Jedi, and that involves, being compassionate and saving others, but also maybe recognizing when is the right time to save others. Han, Leia, Chewie, they were all been fine no matter what happened in The Empire Strikes Back. Luke did not need to be there to save them. They saved him, thankfully. Well, Lando, because Han was in carbonite. But the point I'm trying to emphasize here is that when you look at the story being told, we don't need to concern that what happens next. All we need to be concerned about is Luke faced the dark side and remained in the light and became a Jedi for it, while also redeeming his father, confronting Vader, and finding the true Jedi outcome. Something the Jedi of the prequels have lost sight of for various reasons, and we'll probably talk about that in a later video. But there is more to discuss. We also have Han and Leia's story, so continuing their romance, which, while not as apparent in terms of the narrative as it was in The Empire Strikes Back, here I feel was done much better. That I partially chalk up to the fact that they already set up that they have romantic feelings for each other, so now it just needs to be cemented. And what I really liked how they did that is during the Battle of Endor, Leia does get a grazing wound on her shoulder, and Han's taking a look at it, and two Imperial troopers come up, and Han can tell her that Leia has her blaster ready to go, and Han says, "I love you," because seeing that, very much his thing to do. And Leia responds, "I know," and then shoots the stormtroopers. That's not, the shooting stormtroopers part is not necessarily the romantic part, but the fact that it's rhyming with Leia's confession of her love to Han from Empire Strikes Back, and this time it's Han properly confessing it himself. And that's why both of them said, "I know," in their different circumstances. I think that is beautiful and very great poetry, and shows that they do very much know each other. And then later on, Leia does tell Han that Luke is Leia's sister, because they needed to clear that up, because Han was a little bit jealous right there. Hey, we know eventually in timeline, both canon and Legends will have a Jedi as his brother-in-law, so there's that. There's also the murder teddy bears, the Ewoks, and I gotta say, they were going to eat our heroes. They were. And if not for basically Luke force levitating C-3PO, it would have happened. And we learn actually more context from a certain point of view of why the Ewoks are reverent to C-3PO because he vaguely resembles one of the gods known as the Golden One. And that's just some additional context the books bring in, but it's a very fun context to bring in. And honestly, the Ewoks there, they're brutal to the Empire. I caught this time on my watch through. They literally, during one of the scenes were beating up stormtroopers, they cracked the stormtroopers' armor, which, yes, for filming purposes, I'm pretty sure was made of plastic, but in universe is plastoid, which is like a super sturdy plastic that it can block, projectiles. Don't get on the wrong side of Ewoks, since they can break something that apparently projectiles can't break. Yeah, they're brutal. And not to mention, at the end, during Victory Celebration, they're drumming on stormtrooper helmets. What happened to the stormtroopers? What happened to the Imperials? They probably tried to eat them. At least in Forces of Destiny, Leia did stop some stormtroopers from getting eaten by giving Ewoks rations, but could she have stopped them all? I'm not so sure. And yeah, some war souvenirs too from fallen troopers and all that. But I guarantee you, the Ewoks would have eaten the Imperials. And they probably did. Do not get on the Ewoks' bad side. Do not. And the Ewok Hunt battle mode, game mode in Star Wars Battlefront 2 is brutal. I literally played it last night and I was the second to last stormtrooper surviving. I don't know how. I was running along the perimeter of the map. I think that's the only reason why. I kept on moving. The stormtroopers also Ewoks won, which is a good thing, but they were scary. And that mode is hard because, yeah, the Ewoks have the advantage there. But I bring all this up to say, Ewoks, people make fun of them. Do not make fun of them. I love how especially more recent stories are leaning into the fact that they're basically murderous teddy bears. Go for that. I love it. But before I end my review, I do want to address another thing as well. I vaguely touched on Vader's redemption, but I want to emphasize, Vader's redemption was not because he destroyed the Sith, fulfilling some chosen one prophecy which may have been misread. Let's remember that. But he was redeemed. He was brought back to life because he chose compassion. He chose not to be a slave to the darkness anymore and chose to save his son. The only person alive who believed that there was still good in him, who believed he could turn from the dark side and redeem himself, which is very much also like Padme. And I think that there is what's the true important thing, is that two people in Anakin's life believed there was still good in him. And if those two people didn't, especially with Luke, because he actually got Vader redeemed, Anakin would have died as Darth Vader, not become Anakin Skywalker once again. Now, we can get into, is Anakin and Vader one person or two people, split personality type thing? Vader thinks so, Palpatine wants to think so, and Obi-Wan Kenobi definitely thinks so, but Padme doesn't, Luke doesn't, I don't think Yoda does as well. My personal headcanon is that Vader, Anakin, is trying to separate the Anakin who should have always been from Vader, from the darkness, the Anakin that became Vader. And actually, Force Ghost Anakin is that Anakin who never experienced the dark side. Yes, he has those memories and all that, as we can actually see in his appearance in Ahsoka, but especially in the context of Return of the Jedi, that is Anakin if he was never corrupted by the dark side, never had Palpatine whispering in his ear. He would have been probably still very reckless at times, and probably still willing to push the line, but some of his more authoritarian fascistic tendencies that we saw in the prequels before he became Vader would likely be because of Palpatine whispering in his ear, corrupting him. This is not like a serious situation. This is a slightly different situation because he's a different character and has a different role in said story. And I think a big part of that is Vader was corrupted. Anakin was corrupted into Vader. Still one person, but trying to disassociate and create almost that split personality. But Anakin was always in there. The Anakin who was always supposed to be was still in there. And in that personality that was always in him, finally gained the strength to act to save his son, to save Luke from the Emperor. And that there is why Anakin, why Vader was redeemed in the narrative. Because he made the right choice. Not because of destiny, not because of anything, but because his inner goodness took action. It finally said enough was enough. We have to do the right thing. We're not going to let fear control us anymore. And he wins and gets redeemed. But those are just my thoughts on all of this. There's a lot more to discuss about Return of the Jedi, so the comment section down below will be open, so let's continue discussion on there. So now that we took a look at the 3 original trilogy films plus Rogue One, let's take a look at the whole picture. So first, I do want to address, which I alluded to in my intro, that Rogue One, production-wise, was made way later. What am I doing there? Let's just move on from that little word vomit hiccup. But Rogue One was made production-wise much later than the 3 original trilogy films, and that does show in some of the filmmaking techniques. Now, I did watch the special editions that are as being shown on Disney Plus, not the original theatrical cuts. So, to say that I had no CGI in the original trilogy would be false, but the original trilogy was made before CGI. And when you compare the use of CGI in the original trilogy to Rogue One, you do see a stark contrast, and that's because a lot of the CGI of the original trilogy special editions have not survived very well. Some of them have, I will say. I know CGI was used to open up Cloud City in Empire Strikes Back, and for a lot of stuff in the Victory Celebration scenes at the end of Return of the Jedi. Those held up pretty well, but a lot of it just did not hold up. There's that one creature that you see on Tatooine before you see the cantina, and there's a stark contrast between that, honestly not very well holding up CGI compared to the practical costumes that were used in the cantina scene. And then you go to Rogue One, where I honestly, except for using the CGI to basically deep fake Grand Moff Tarkin and Princess Leia, not really deep fake because this was actually before deep fake technology, it holds up. That's the only stuff I know is CGI, because I know it's CGI because I've been told it was publicized as that stuff was going to be CGI. The ships I also know are CGI as well because I was told that. And the thing is that because I know that stuff is CGI, that's the only reason why I know it. Because some of that stuff, minus the people stuff, holds up very well that in Rogue One, I can't tell the difference. And that's because I feel like in Rogue One, they were not trying to show off the CGI. I feel like when you're trying to show off CGI, it holds up worse. And I think that's what's going on with a lot of the CGI in the original trilogy special editions. George Lucas is trying to show off, look what we can do with CGI, and it doesn't hold up. And when compared to Rogue One, much more recent, so better CGI technology, the stuff that they wanted to show off being CGI is the stuff that you notice being CGI the most. And I did discuss in my review a little bit about the Uncanny Valley, where Moff Tarkin's reflections look perfect, but himself at times the CGI became apparent. And that there I think is the key. When you're trying to show off how good your CGI is, you I think almost think like, oh, we're going to be past the Uncanny Valley. But people know, and therefore the Uncanny Valley effect comes in. Even when it's a totally alien design, the Uncanny Valley can still be a thing that impacts how you view. Now, I will also say, while a lot of the practical effects do hold up in the original trilogy, not all do. I kind of pointed out that some of the stop motion effects in The Empire Strikes Back just did not hold up as well as they could have. But at the same time, there's a lot more practical effects that did hold up perfectly well, and I did not even notice because they held up well. And I think no matter whether you do CGI or practical effects or some other form of or even in-camera effects as well, no matter what kind of special effects you're using, the more you're, I think, trying to show off your special effects, the more likely I think it is that they are going to not hold up well. Basically, what I'm saying is if you're like, hey, look at this cool effect, whether it's practical or CGI, it doesn't matter. People are drawn to that being an effect and are going to be more critical of it. Therefore, they're going to be more likely to see the faults, see the problems with it. But when you're not trying to draw people's attention to it, it blends in much better. And that's my theory what's going on there. But that's not even getting into the story. That's just getting into the effects making part of the movies. When it comes to the story itself, the Rogue One, despite being a separate film from the original trilogy, is very much a connecting that part of the story. It is, you could say, a bit disjointed because you follow different characters, but that happens when you have, many movies and many stories going on at once in a shared universe. But the thing is, Rogue One, a big part of the movie is passing things, is especially near the end, was passing things. The Rogue One team passed the plans to the rebels on the ship, who then literally passed it to additional rebels, eventually getting it to Princess Leia. And that there, I think, is, I don't know if it was intentional or not, but very much symbolizes this fight against the Empire. The story that is being told in Rogue One is being passed from the Rogue One team to the original trilogy characters. And especially when you factor in Star Wars Andor, you can see that very much. The end of Rogue One is passing from Cassian and his team fighting the Empire to Luke, Leia, and Han fighting the Empire in terms of stories. So that there fits very nicely. And also just when you do a Rogue One and A New Hope in isolation, they very much flow right into each other. While the themes may change a little bit and how things are told may change, there is that consistent storyline of we are fighting the Empire, we are fighting tyranny to create a better galaxy. That's the storyline pretty much throughout all those stories. And I'm including Star Wars Andor in this. Fighting for a better tomorrow. Sometimes it does take time for characters to realize why they are fighting. Cassian has that. Luke needed his own call to action. Leia's like the only one who didn't need a call to action in the entire thing. I believe her call to action is handled in the book Leia, Princess of Alderaan, which I have not yet read, which I really should read. But I say all this to convey to you that the original trilogy is considered the gold standard for Star Wars storytelling for a reason, and the way Rogue One and by extension Andor have built into it has made a much more, I think, cohesive story, a much better picture on why the Empire is being fought and how potentially, even though it was never said, how our characters in the original trilogy may have been influenced in subtle ways by the Rogue One team, by Cassian Andor and his story and everyone he connected with. In fact, in the comics, the reason why Rogue Squadron was created by Luke Skywalker was to honor Rogue One. I really love that, and I kind of wish they've done more with that, which I don't really think they have. But that's more of a story outside of the original trilogy thing, though, not in the original trilogy itself. But I do bring that all up to show that I really just enjoy this era of Star Wars, and I really love how despite these stories being made at different times, not really planned together, all do create a good cohesive narrative because all the creators generally had the same two things in mind: a creative passion, and they know what they wanted to say about resisting authoritarianism and tyranny. While it's much more overt in Andor than it ever was in the original trilogy, those same themes are present and it just fits nicely. Now, resisting evil is more how they frame it in the original trilogy, but isn't tyranny just evil made manifest in the world? That's at least how I'm going to look at it for the nature of this review. But those are just my thoughts on Rogue One and the original trilogy. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Thank you for watching my video. I do hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please be sure to give this video a like and share. Also, consider subscribing to my channel to stay up to date on all my latest content. In the meantime, thank you for watching, and as always, have a good day, a good night, wherever you are. May the Force be with you, always.